My name is Judy Smith. I'm 42 years old and I've built my entire life on logic. I'm a data analyst, patterns, probabilities, clean lines of cause and effect. That's where I find my comfort. For 15 years, my husband Eric called me his rock. That was the role I played. I was the steady ground he could leap from, the foundation he could test his wild ideas against. In those years, I carried the weight of stability. I paid the mortgage, managed our investments, handled insurance, and made sure nothing ever fell apart. He used to say it freed him so he could chase whatever dream or passion called to him that month. First, it was a pottery studio. The clay dried faster than the money drained, but I smiled and reassured him. Then it was yoga teaching half-empty classes at a community center while I quietly covered the bills. Last year, he fell in love with meditation retreats and a so-called spiritual instructor named Vanessa, who also happened to be his new tennis partner. I didn't mind at first. I thought we had a deal. I would build the ship and he would be the sail. But what I didn't realize was that one day he'd decide the ship itself was a prison. It was last Thursday when he sat me down in the living room. The one he'd insisted on redecorating in neutral, calming tones I now realized had been chosen to soothe him, not me. He couldn't even look me in the eye. His focus stayed fixed on the decorative vase perched on the mantel, a vase that had cost more than my first car. "Judy," he began, voice soft, like he'd rehearsed it in a therapist's mirror. "I need some space. I feel like I'm losing myself, you know?" I didn't answer. I'd learned long ago that the preamble in these conversations was for the speaker, not the listener. "You're a good woman," he continued, offering me a compliment the way someone pats a dog's head before walking away. "A wonderful provider. But you're not fun anymore. We're not fun. Everything is so planned, so safe. I need to feel alive again. I need to find my own path." His words drifted through the room like smoke, suffocating, yet insubstantial. I let my eyes settle on the wooden beam above the media center, the one he'd insisted on installing last fall purely for aesthetics. It had cost my entire annual bonus, a monument to form over function. And now here he was, talking about how safety and planning were suffocating him. Something inside me didn't shatter. It calcified. All those little dissonant details of the past few months snapped into a perfect pattern: the late-night giggling texts he'd brushed off as work friends, the expensive new workout clothes from brands I'd never heard of, the endless praises for Vanessa's spiritual wisdom. For a woman who studies data patterns for a living, the regression line was suddenly crystal clear. The conclusion was both obvious and devastating. I really looked at him for the first time in months. His designer joggers, the perfectly styled hair, the manicured hand that hadn't worn a wedding ring in weeks, because he'd claimed it interfered with his energy flow. He was waiting for me to beg, to plead for us to book a trip to Bali, to promise I'd loosen up, to transform into someone I've never been. Instead, I said just one word: done. The sound of it startled him. His brow furrowed, as though I'd skipped a page in the script he'd written for us. Done. Just like that. "You're not even going to fight for us." "You just told me you want a trial separation," I replied, my voice even level, almost detached. "I'm agreeing to your terms. This is what you want. You should be happy." "Well, yes, but..." He floundered, searching for the argument he'd prepared. "You're not supposed to..." "Done," I repeated the word, flat and final. His mouth opened, then closed again, like an actor whose partner had jumped ahead to the ending. Finally, he said, "Okay, well, good. I'm going to pack a few things." And he went upstairs. I didn't follow. Instead, I sat there listening to the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the sound of my life being dismantled piece by piece. At first, rage rose hot and fast, making my hands tremble. I wanted to grab that ridiculous vase and smash it against the wall, watch it splinter into shards that no amount of glue could fix. Then came grief, sharp and suffocating. I thought about the man I'd married, the one who used to laugh with me while we ate cheap pizza on the bare floor of our first apartment. Where had he gone? I let myself drown in it: rage, sorrow, disbelief for an hour. No more. Because after that, clarity arrived, cold and solid. This wasn't a trial. This was an ambush. And I refused to be its victim. By the time Eric came down the stairs with his carefully packed bags, I was already somewhere else. My mind was racing, not with panic, but with structure. Separation wasn't just emotional, it was legal. It had rules, boundaries, consequences. He gave me a breezy smile, as if this was some grand adventure, something to laugh about later. "Don't miss me too much, Judy. You'll see it's the right thing." I didn't answer. My phone was already in my hand. When the door closed behind him, I dialed. My first call wasn't to a friend or a sibling. It wasn't even to the bank. It was to Richard Grant, a family law attorney recommended by a colleague. I got his voicemail. My voice was steady, concise, stripped of hesitation. Hello, Richard. My name is Judy Smith. I'd like to schedule a consultation. My husband has requested a trial separation, and I believe it's more serious than that. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I hung up. Within 30 minutes, my inbox pinged with a reply, a consultation set for the next morning. That night, I barely slept. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind kept spinning, already mapping out every step. He wanted a new life. Fine. I'd make sure he lived it fully without the safety net he thought would always catch him. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a strange, unexpected calm. Because when the rock is abandoned, it doesn't crumble, it hardens. The next morning, I sat across from Richard Grant in his office. The space was minimal, but warm, dark wood shelves, a single plant, and a wall of carefully arranged legal texts. He didn't waste time with small talk. He listened, pen tapping lightly on his notebook, while I explained everything Eric's announcement. His sudden obsession with freedom, the suspicious pattern of expenses, the hours he spent with Vanessa. When I finished, Richard leaned back. His eyes were sharp, his voice measured. Judy. The moment of separation is a critical legal marker. Every decision from this point forward must be transparent and defensible. You're not here for revenge. You're here to protect yourself. His calmness steadied me. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like I wasn't adrift. Where do we start? I asked. Financial separation, he said. You need your own accounts immediately. Document everything. Leave him access to enough funds that it doesn't look like you're cutting him off, but ensure your income is protected. Credit disentanglement is next. Cancel his supplementary cards. Make sure he can't rack up debt in your name. Then we'll handle insurance and benefits. The words were practical, clinical. Yet to me they felt like armor. That afternoon I sat at my desk laptop open, every keystroke deliberate. First I opened a new individual checking account. I didn't drain our joint account that could be seen as spiteful. Instead I left $4,000 in place, a buffer. Enough for groceries bills, whatever he claimed to need in the short term. Then I transferred this rest, my savings, my salary, to the new account. I noted the exact time and date in a spreadsheet. Evidence as Richard had advised. Next, I updated my direct deposit with HR so that every future paycheck would flow straight into this new account. No more silent siphoning of my work into his whims. Finally, I picked up the phone and called the credit card company. My voice didn't shake when I said the words, "My husband and I are separated. Please cancel his supplementary card immediately." The agent asked if I wanted to dispute the $8,000 outstanding balance. No, I said. I'll take responsibility. It was like cutting a gangrenous limb, painful but clean. Insurance was the last step. I logged into the HR portal, heart pounding in my chest. I updated my marital status to legally separated. A notice appeared on the screen. Spousal benefits will terminate at the end of the month. It was June 15th, 15 days. Eric's health, dental, and vision coverage all gone. His prescription for migraine medication would cost him more than $600 a month out of pocket. He didn't know it yet, but his new freedom came with a price tag he couldn't imagine. I sat back staring at the screen. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a hollow steadiness. 2 days later, Eric breezed into the house to collect more of his belongings. He was whistling, as he stuffed shirts into a designer duffel. "Hope you're not too lonely rattling around in this big house," he said, flashing me the smile that used to melt me 15 years ago. Now it looked rehearsed cheap. "I'm managing," I replied. He kept his back to me, scrolling on his phone. "You should really try meditation, Judy," Vanessa says. "I've started the formal process," I interrupted. His head snapped up. "Process." "The separation," I said. "Legal proceedings. I've retained counsel. You'll probably want to talk to a lawyer." He blinked, stunned for a fraction of a second before recovering his swagger. "Oh, Judy, don't be so dramatic. This is a trial separation. We'll talk in a few weeks. I'm just finding myself." "You'll want a lawyer?" I repeated, my voice flat, final. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. I could almost hear the calculations spinning in his head. He wasn't used to me cutting through his performance. He was used to me smoothing over the edges, cushioning his falls. But not anymore. That night after he left again, I sat in the quiet house. Every corner held echoes, his laughter, our arguments, the ghost of what I thought we were. I walked into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and pulled out the expensive blender he'd insisted on buying last year. He said it would change his health. He used it twice. I ran my hand over the cold glass pitcher and laughed sharp and humorless. This was him always searching for the next cure, the next thrill, leaving me to sweep up the pieces. For the first time, I let myself whisper the truth aloud. He's not coming back. The words didn't break me, they steadied me. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Eric. This is so weird. My credit card just got declined at Lululemon. Can you call them? Their system must be down. I stared at the screen, the irony almost laughable. For him, financial security had always been invisible, a given like oxygen. Now he was choking. I typed back, "There's no system error. I canceled your supplementary card last week. We're separated. Our finances are too." For a long time, the three dots pulsed, then disappeared. I knew what he was doing. Checking the balance of the old account, seeing the $4,000 cushion I'd left, realizing that the endless river of money he thought would always flow had been dammed. I could almost picture his face, shock curdling into anger, then disbelief. But me, I felt only calm. Because boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. And for the first time in 15 years, I had drawn mine. It didn't take long for the cracks in Eric's new life to appear. Just 5 days after his dramatic exit, my phone buzzed again. Another text. "Judy, this is ridiculous. My card got declined again. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? The cashier treated me like a criminal. Fix this." I let the message sit on my screen. My first impulse was the old one jump in, smooth things over, make it easy for him. But that Judy no longer existed. I typed slowly, deliberately. "We're separated. Our finances are separate now, too. You can use the debit card for what's left in the joint account." The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I pictured him staring at the balance, realizing the endless flow of money he'd treated as background noise had shrunk to a trickle. The earthquake came 2 mornings later. The doorbell rang at 9 a.m. When I opened it, Eric stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight. Beside him was his father, Howard. Howard didn't even wait for me to invite them in. He marched straight into the foyer, his voice booming with authority. "Judy, I demand an explanation." I folded my arms, leaning against the banister. "Good morning to you too, Howard." Eric hung back, sulking, radiating indignation. "You canceled his credit card." Howard barked. "Are you trying to humiliate my son?" I kept my tone calm, measured. "I'm establishing financial boundaries. It's standard procedure in a legal separation." Howard's eyes narrowed. "Legal separation, Judy. This isn't a business contract. This is marriage. You don't just cut someone off." Eric finally exploded. "Exactly. You're trying to control me, to punish me, just because I want more than this. This boring, predictable life." I turned my gaze on him, flat as stone. "I'm not punishing you. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. You wanted freedom. You wanted your own path. I'm simply letting you experience the reality of that choice." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Then I delivered the final blow. "And since we're discussing logistics," I said, turning deliberately to Eric, "I need to formally notify you of something. I informed my employer of our separation. As a result, your eligibility for my health, dental, and vision insurance will terminate at the end of this month." Silence. Howard blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" Eric's face went pale. His voice dropped to a whisper. "My prescription." I nodded. "Your migraine medication. Without insurance, it'll cost over $600 a month. Cobra coverage will be available, but that will run closer to $900. Howard's mouth fell open. "That's monstrous. You can't do that to him. He has a medical condition." I didn't flinch. "He's a 38-year-old adult who chose separation. The coverage was part of our marriage. He ended the marriage, he ends the benefits. That's not cruelty, it's consequence." For the first time, Eric looked shaken. The confident smile, the breezy deflections, they evaporated. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger, someone unrecognizable. "You're being cruel," he hissed, his eyes glassy with rage and panic. "This isn't you, Judy." I met his gaze steadily. "You're right. This isn't the woman you married. She would have absorbed the betrayal, quietly suffered, and kept providing. That woman is gone." Howard stepped forward, his voice rising again. "We'll call a lawyer. You'll be hearing from us." I smiled faintly, not out of joy, but out of cold certainty. I would expect nothing less. I already retained mine. The color drained further from Eric's face. He grabbed his father's arm and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I stood there in the silence that followed my hand resting on the banister. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from release. I thought about the nights I'd sat by his side, pressing cool cloths to his forehead during migraine attacks, fetching water, whispering reassurances while he whimpered in pain. Back then, I thought love meant carrying everything for both of us. Now I realize love without respect is just servitude. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The house felt too big, too quiet. Yet beneath the loneliness was something new, something sharper clarity. Eric thought this was just a performance, that I would wait in the wings ready to resume my role whenever he tired of the spotlight. But he underestimated me. Boundaries had been drawn, and for the first time in 15 years, I was on the right side of them. The letter arrived 2 weeks after that confrontation. Heavy cream paper, Eric's lawyer's name, embossed in navy at the top. The language inside was a masterpiece of selective storytelling. According to them, I was a cruel, vindictive wife who had, in a fit of rage, abandoned her emotionally fragile husband. I had maliciously severed financial ties, leaving poor Eric destitute and humiliated. The letter demanded I immediately reinstate all financial support, continue covering his medical expenses, and my personal favorite pay for his legal fees. I almost laughed reading it. Almost. Instead, I slid the letter across Richard's desk the next morning. He skimmed it, lips barely twitching. Shock and awe tactic, he said. They're loud and aggressive, hoping you'll panic and fold. We won't. His calmness was infectious. He began drafting our response, every sentence sharp as a blade. We didn't mirror their theatrics. We simply presented facts that Eric had voluntarily left the marital home, that I had acted on legal advice, that the joint account still contained $4,000 for his use. Every claim they lobbed at me was met with evidence clean and cold. But Richard didn't stop there. He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. If you're comfortable, Judy, I recommend we go on the offensive. I raised an eyebrow. Offensive. Dissipation of marital assets, he said. If Eric spent your shared money on his extracurricular activities, we can demand reimbursement. But we'll need proof. I thought about the late-night texts, the expensive clothes, the spiritual retreats with Vanessa. Proof wouldn't be hard to find. Do it, I said. 3 days later, I received the report. A private investigator Richard had hired tailed Eric with quiet precision. The photos were time-stamped, crisp, impossible to dispute. Eric and Vanessa entering her apartment late at night, her arm looped through his. The two of them sharing breakfast on her balcony the next morning, mugs raised in easy intimacy, her hand brushing his cheek as they laughed together. I stared at the images, my stomach twisting. Proof didn't soften the betrayal. It sharpened it, made it undeniable. But alongside the ache came something else, power. We attached the report to our legal response. Alongside it, Richard filed a motion for discovery demanding Eric's bank records and crucially subpoenaing Vanessa's financials. If my salary had funded their dinners, trips, or gifts, the court would know. It was no longer just a legal matter, it was exposure. The reaction came swiftly. One evening, as I was chopping vegetables for dinner, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail until instinct told me to answer. Judy. The voice was hesitant male. Eric. No, not Eric. The other voice, nervous, cracking slightly. This is, I'm not sure if we've met. My name's Mark. It took me a second. Mark, then it clicked. Eric's guru had a middle name he sometimes used to appear more grounded. It was Vanessa's brother. No, not brother. Her cover. He'd used the alias before, but the voice on the phone wasn't serene or enlightened. It was panicked. I think there's been some misunderstanding, he stammered. I don't know why your lawyer is coming after me. I'm just a tennis coach. Misunderstanding. My voice was ice. You've been with my husband for months, and you've been enjoying it on my dime. He exhaled sharply like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. Look, Judy, I didn't know it was like this. Eric said you two were basically over, that it was just a matter of time. Then you'll have no problem confirming that under oath, I said. Dead silence. That silence told me everything. He wasn't enlightened. He was terrified. Terrified of court. Terrified of exposure. Terrified of the house of cards collapsing. And it was collapsing. That week, the voicemail started. Eric's voice, first furious. You're destroying my life, Judy. This isn't the woman I married. How could you be so vindictive? Then pleading, Judy, please. We can work something out. Just stop dragging Vanessa into this. Then pitiful. You know I can't afford those medications. You're condemning me. You don't want me to suffer like that, do you? Every time I let the voicemail play, then deleted it. My resolve didn't waver. One night I sat in my therapist's office, the PI photos still echoing in my mind. I expected her to push me toward forgiveness, toward compassion. Instead, she asked quietly, "Judy, what would it look like for you to stop carrying responsibility for his choices?" I thought about that for a long time. The answer was sharp, immediate. It would look like this. For the first time, I believed it. Eric thought I would crumble, that my identity as the rock meant I would always protect him, always cushion his falls. But he forgot something fundamental. A rock doesn't bend, it doesn't cushion, it endures. And when pushed against long enough, it can crush whatever smashes against it. The war had begun, and I was not the one who would break. The first call came late at night. I was in bed reading when my phone lit up with Eric's name. I almost ignored it, but some instinct told me to answer. "Judy," he began, his voice tight, urgent. "This has gone too far. You don't need to drag Vanessa into this." I said nothing at first, letting the silence stretch. "She's innocent," he rushed on. "She has nothing to do with our problems. You're just trying to punish me by humiliating her." My reply was calm, deliberate. "Eric, you spent our money on her. That makes her part of this. A witness. And if you don't like the consequences, maybe you shouldn't have funded your affair with our joint account." He sputtered. "It wasn't, Judy. This is insane. You're destroying lives." "No," I said, my voice dropping into steel. "I'm revealing them." He hung up before I could say more. 2 days later, Richard called. His voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Vanessa's counsel reached out. She's nervous." "Nervous," I repeated. "She doesn't want to be subpoenaed. Her reputation at the club, her teaching her students, none of it can survive the kind of exposure she'd face in court. She's already cracking." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a slow, steady breath. Not triumph exactly, but the sense of a scale tipping back toward balance. The messages from Eric grew erratic. "You're a monster. You'll regret this." Then minutes later, "Please, Judy, just stop. Let's settle this quietly, for old time's sake. And then one that almost made me laugh. "Vanessa thinks you're obsessed with us. She says you're projecting your insecurities." Obsessed. I stared at the message, shaking my head. If anything, I felt less obsessed than ever. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't occupied with cleaning up his chaos. I was free to notice the quiet hum of the fridge, the rhythm of my own breath, the steady certainty of a life I was now steering myself. But Howard wasn't done. One Sunday afternoon, he showed up unannounced, pounding on my door. His face was flushed, his words spilling over in anger. "You're ruining my son's life." "He's sick, Judy. You know about his migraines. How can you strip him of everything and still sleep at night?" I let him rage. His words washed over me like waves breaking against stone. When he finally paused, I said evenly, "Howard, your son made choices. I'm not responsible for cleaning up those choices anymore." He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "But you're his wife." "No," I said with a calm certainty that surprised even me. "I was his wife. He ended that when he chose someone else." Howard's mouth opened and closed. Then he turned, muttering, "You'll regret this," as he stormed away. I watched him go, realizing that some men, Eric Howard, would never understand a woman choosing not to bear their burdens. That evening in therapy, I admitted something I hadn't dared to before. "I'm not angry at Vanessa," I said slowly. "Not really. I'm angry at myself for ignoring the signs for carrying him so long, that he thought I'd carry him forever." My therapist nodded, her voice soft. "What if anger isn't the end point? What if it's the bridge?" "The bridge to what?" "To freedom," she said simply. The word lingered in my chest long after I left her office. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself in the kitchen, staring at the sleek espresso machine Eric had insisted on buying, then complained about because it was too complicated. I pressed the button, listening to the low hum, the steam, the slow pour of a perfect cup. I sipped, savoring the quiet. Eric had mocked me for finding joy in something so small, calling me boring for clinging to routine. But in that moment, I realized what he saw as boring was what kept me alive. Routine wasn't prison. It was peace. The next morning, Richard forwarded me an email, Vanessa's lawyer again. This time a proposal. "She's willing to provide a sworn statement," he explained, confirming the affair, the timeline, even the expenses Eric covered. In exchange, she wants to be dropped from the case. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. The woman who was supposed to be Eric's new beginning was now bargaining to save herself, even if it meant burning him down. I closed my laptop slowly, a bitter laugh escaping. For months, Eric had treated me like ballast, dead weight, holding him back. And now the woman he'd left me for was about to jettison him to save her own skin. Poetic in its own brutal way. That night, another voicemail from Eric. His voice cracked, desperate now. "Judy, please. Vanessa's panicking. She says she can't handle this. Don't do this to us. Don't make her suffer because of me." I listened, my hand resting lightly on the phone. Once those words, "don't make her suffer because of me," would have hooked straight into my guilt, my compulsion to shield him. But now I let them pass through me. I whispered to the empty room, "You're suffering because of you, Eric, not me." And for the first time, I believed it. It ended not with a bang, but with a signature. After weeks of posturing threats and late-night voicemails, Eric's entire case collapsed under its own weight. The trigger was Vanessa. Her lawyer delivered the affidavit, detailed, meticulous, damning. She confirmed the affair had begun long before Eric left the house. She confirmed the dinners, the spiritual retreats, the shopping trips, all paid for with funds from our joint account. And she confirmed that Eric had promised her a new life once he cut ties with me. The irony was sharp enough to taste. She'd been willing to betray him in writing, all to protect her reputation. In the end, the sail that Eric had chased after so desperately was the one that abandoned him when the winds turned. Richard laid out the consequences with clinical precision. Her affidavit destroys their narrative, he explained. No court is going to side with Eric now. Infidelity strips him of leverage. Dissipation of assets means we can demand reimbursement. His lawyer knows it. They'll push him to settle. And settle he did. The house, our carefully curated home with its overpriced beams and decorative vases, was sold. The equity was split down the middle, state law's version of fairness. My half became the down payment for a modest but peaceful condo. His half a lump sum he clung to like a lifeline. Spousal support, his last desperate attempt. But the judge wasn't swayed. With infidelity proven and his misuse of marital funds documented, Eric was granted only 2 years of minimal rehabilitative alimony, barely enough to cover the rent on a small apartment. And the assets, Richard's strategy paid off. We proved Eric had spent over $15,000 of my income on Vanessa. That sum was deducted directly from his share of the equity and awarded to me. For the first time in months, the numbers were in my favor. Eric's unraveling was swift. He moved into a cramped one-bedroom on the outskirts of town. Gone were the designer clothes, the endless retreats, the glow of someone who thought the world was his playground. Vanessa disappeared as soon as the affidavit was signed. Whether she left him or he left her, I didn't care. She vanished, and with her went whatever illusion he'd been chasing. Howard still called. Sometimes his voice a mix of fury and sorrow. "You've destroyed him," he accused. I never argued. I simply said no. He destroyed himself. And hung up. For me, the adjustment was quieter. My condo was smaller, yes, but every corner was mine. No decorative vases, no meaningless beams, just shelves lined with my books, my old comfortable chair, and the espresso machine Eric had mocked, but I now used daily. At first, the silence felt foreign. I'd lived so long with his chaos buzzing in the background that peace seemed alien. But over time, the quiet became a balm. One Saturday morning, I stood in my new kitchen sipping coffee, sunlight streaming through the blinds. I thought about the settlement, the hearings, the endless back and forth. How exhausting it had been, how merciless. But also how necessary. Because what remained wasn't bitterness. It was space. Eric once accused me of being too safe, of living a life that was predictable, boring. But as I stood there, I realized something profound. Predictability wasn't prison. It was freedom. Freedom from his whims. Freedom from the constant dread of when the next new passion would cost us another fortune. Freedom from carrying someone who never once thought to carry me. That afternoon, I went hiking. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but Eric had mocked it as too mundane. He preferred exotic retreats, places where he could reinvent himself with strangers. The trail was steep, the sun relentless. But as I reached the ridge and looked out across the valley, something inside me loosened. For the first time in years, I felt peace, real, bone-deep peace. It wasn't the thrill Eric had been chasing. It was something steadier, stronger. It was mine. And in that moment, I understood Eric had wanted to be free. But freedom without responsibility is just chaos. I, on the other hand, had finally learned what true freedom was. It wasn't carrying someone else's weight. It was standing firmly in my own life, my own choices, my own quiet joy. The collapse of his world was the rebirth of mine. And though part of me still grieved the man I thought I'd married, another part whispered something simple, something undeniable. You survived. You endured. You're free. The divorce papers arrived in a manila envelope thick with legal stamps and signatures. Richard handed them to me across his desk with a simple nod. "It's finalized, Judy. You're free." 2 words I'd never thought would feel so heavy and yet so light. That night, I sat in my condo, the envelope resting on the coffee table like an exorcised ghost. The place was still new, the walls bare, the furniture modest. But it was mine. Every object in it carried no hidden debts, no unspoken resentments. I poured a glass of wine and curled into my old armchair, the one Eric had always wanted to throw out because it was ugly. To me, it was beautiful, worn in all the right places, carrying the shape of my body like a memory. The silence pressed around me, but it no longer felt like absence. It felt like space. In the weeks that followed, I built small rituals. Coffee each morning from the complicated espresso machine Eric had hated. Books stacked high on the nightstand. Walks at dusk through quiet streets where no one knew me as Eric's wife. It amazed me how quickly I began to breathe differently. I wasn't haunted by Vanessa. She faded into the background like a subplot that had lost its audience. I wasn't even haunted by Eric. He was simply gone, a cautionary tale in the margins of my life. What lingered instead were questions, not about him, but about me. How had I let myself become so complacent? How had I ignored so many red flags, the late nights, the secretive texts, the endless withdrawals, labeled business expenses? For years, I told myself love meant patience, tolerance, sacrifice. But love without respect is erosion. It wears you down until you no longer recognize the shape of yourself. Now I was learning to recognize myself again. One Saturday, I joined a hiking group. At first, I felt awkward, surrounded by strangers chatting easily, couples holding hands, families corralling children. But as the trail steepened, conversation faded. Each person focused on their own breath, their own climb. Halfway up, a woman beside me smiled. First time. Yes, I admitted. You're doing great, she said before moving ahead. It was such a small kindness, but it landed with unexpected force. I didn't need someone to carry me. I just needed to know I could carry myself. At the summit, I stood on the ridge, wind whipping through my hair, the valley spread out like a painted canvas. For a long moment, I just breathed. I thought about Eric chasing freedom in other people's arms, mistaking chaos for passion. I thought about Howard railing at me for refusing to prop up his son. I thought about the girl I'd once been, the one who sat on the floor of a tiny apartment eating cheap pizza with a man who swore he'd never let her down. And then I let them all go. The sun slid low across the horizon, casting the world in gold. I closed my eyes and whispered, not to Eric, not to Vanessa, not even to the ghost of the marriage I'd lost, but to myself. You're not an anchor anymore. The words surprised me, but they felt right. For so long, I'd been the anchor, keeping Eric steady, holding us in place while he reached for the sky. But anchors keep ships from moving. Anchors sink. I opened my eyes, looking out across the expanse. You're a mountain, I whispered. Unmovable, strong, standing on my own. The drive back was quiet, but my mind hummed with clarity. I didn't know what the future held. New friends, new love, or maybe just more mornings with coffee and books. It didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't living as someone's foundation. I was living as myself. Weeks later, Eric's name popped up on my phone again. I stared at it, heart steady, not racing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because some doors aren't meant to be reopened. One morning, as I prepared my coffee, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her, the woman standing there, hair loose, eyes bright, shoulders unbowed. Then I realized that woman was me, Judy Smith, 42, survivor, free. I smiled a small private smile meant only for myself. The rock that once held someone else's ship steady had finally found its true form. It wasn't an anchor anymore. It was a mountain, and it finally stood alone,